What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. So next week, February will officially kick off, and that means you're going to start hearing more and more about a potential Nintendo Direct. At least the hype and anticipation will be building. Well, yesterday, there was an interesting change that was spotted from Nintendo that's starting to get that hype train on the track, and we'll go over that here today. Also, we are going to be talking about the PlayStation 5 DualSense controller, specifically a teardown that was done that's showing some unfortunate aspects of the internals, and we'll also be talking about Dead Space Remake. It's out today, but I wanted to go over how it did with reviewers. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button. Helps out a ton. And if you're new here to the Spawnwave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. And we're going to start today with Neil Druckmann and Naughty Dog. He did talk a bit about the future of two core franchises, that being Uncharted and The Last of Us. Let's see over on VGC what he had to say, this talking with BuzzFeed. He says, for us, Uncharted was insanely successful. Uncharted 4 was one of our best-selling games, and we're able to put our final brushstroke on that story and say that we're done. We're moving on. Likewise, with The Last of Us, it's up to us whether we want to continue it or not. Our process is the same thing we did when we did Part 2, which is if we can come up with a compelling story that has this universal message and statement about love, just like the first and second game did, then we will tell that story. If we can't come up with something, we have a very strong ending with Part 2, and that will be the end. So I don't mind the fact that they would be moving on from Uncharted. I think with a lot of these narrative-driven games, and you try to string one after the other, you start to run out of interesting stories to tell in that universe, and you want to move on to something like The Last of Us, which I think Part 3 will happen. I feel like they've mentioned before that they at least have an idea, or it even being written. But there have been also rumors and talks about them working on a new intellectual property, which, after seeing what they've been able to accomplish with Uncharted and The Last of Us, yeah, I'm very, very curious to see what would be next for Naughty Dog. At least for now, we know that they're working on the multiplayer component for The Last of Us with what looks to be much larger factions, but after that, I am interested to see what they can come up with. Hopefully, it won't be too much longer until they're ready to at least give us an idea as to what's up next. Also, we had a bit of a surprise recently with the PlayStation Plus Premium tier, specifically with the classic games that they have. We know games like PlayStation Portable, PlayStation 1, those have trophy support now, but they are optional, which means developers can just put the games out without having to worry about setting up an entire trophy list that you can earn and eventually get to that coveted platinum trophy. Well, it also looks like they can go back and retroactively add in trophy support. Take a look at this posted up over on Push Square. Once thought impossible, PlayStation Classic Super Stardust Portable just got trophy support. That's a very, very dramatic headline there for adding trophies to a PSP title, but it's good to know that this is possible. I know not everyone cares about trophy support in games, but it is a nice feature, a nice addition for the classic tier. The fact that you can earn trophies playing through something like Siphon Filter or Stardust, that's pretty cool. And that they can go back and add trophies if they decide to later on is also a nice benefit and something that can legitimately surprise people with different patches like here with Stardust on the PSP. Oh, and we did see a bit of a response from Skate after that insider gaming story started to trend online around the loot boxes and all this. We can see this over on Twitter from the Skate account saying a reminder of some of the things we shared in episode 1 of the Boardroom last year. Not pay to win, no map areas locked behind paywall, no paid loot boxes, no paid gameplay advantages. Look, EA's been through this before. They know kind of the stigma that loot boxes carry with it to where people do start to think it is pay to win. I believe in Skate, it will just be cosmetic stuff, but again, for a skateboarding game, that's part of the entire experience is the customization aspect. So my only hope is that it's not incredibly grindy. No pun intended, but like, hopefully it's not to the point where you have to spend all day playing to get a new pair of shoes or a sticker for your skateboard. So we'll see at some point whenever they're ready to launch the thing. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with the Nintendo Direct that is now starting to pick up some steam online. As soon as we went from 2022 to 2023, like the clock struck midnight and we ticked over to the new year, there were then talks about a Nintendo Direct. However, I feel like most of us looked at previous years and realized it probably won't be in January. In fact, we'd be looking towards February at the earliest. Well, now there is some movement behind the scenes for two games. One, you can probably guess, as it's the biggest game upcoming this year for Nintendo. It could end up being the biggest game of the generation for them, as it is, of course, The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Take a look here, though, at the other title that was noticed, this having to do with NSUID. So this was spotted and then dropped on Famiboards by Daybreak, started to make the rounds online. The other title is Advanced Wars. By the way, this is good news because look, I know Nintendo was trying to be sensitive of the situation that's been going on in the world. That was April, I think, then. So now they've seen games come out like Call of Duty or even GoldenEye, which, by the way, GoldenEye was kind of caught up in that, according to rumors. So maybe the fact that that's come out now, they're looking around and saying, well, this game has to come out eventually. So Advanced Wars had its NSUID changed, and this was pointed out from December to today, where you can see the 14-digit code that's changed. The other one being Tears of the Kingdom that did not have an NSUID now does. It also has a SKU, so all of that has been updated and changed. This was specifically noticed, I believe, for Canada, so it will be changing in other regions. And I also noticed online people are talking about it's shifted in Brazil. So what is happening here is them just sort of preparing for the possibility of, I don't know, pre-ordering something like Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. And that's usually what people will line these UIDs up with, is as they are changed in the back end on, say, the eShop, they are getting things just sort of ready ahead of time for when they would want to start taking orders. And I don't think it's shocking to think that, okay, we're probably going to have a Nintendo Direct here in the next couple of weeks, considering last year we had one in February, the year before we had one in February, 2020, kind of a strange year, but then the year before that. So yes, in the next couple of weeks going into February, there will be some sort of general Nintendo Direct. I think that's a safe bet to make there. You could look at the calendar. Sure, the week of the 7th and 8th, somewhere in there on like a Tuesday or Wednesday, that to me would be a good spot, we'll say, for a Direct. But then you start to think about the different things that could be there. The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom would be obvious since that's coming out in May, and that's going to be the next big marketing push. Advanced Wars, that could also be there. I'm curious if they would reintroduce it or if they would just show it again and shadow drop it. Like, not even try to put it out later, like, okay, it's coming out now in April or something. No, it's just out now. Although they did have physical copies that were printed and apparently recalled and like in warehouses somewhere, so that's a whole thing to figure out. But either way, yes, I think it's safe to start getting some of that Nintendo Direct hype going, but just keep in mind, it's probably not happening like next week or something. I think we're still 2 to 3 weeks off before things really start getting moving, but this is just an early indication that, yeah, Nintendo's planning out a general Nintendo Direct. Go figure. Next up, let's talk about that DualSense Edge and some bad news for the controller, and kind of a strange bit of news, actually, because this is a controller that is $200, which is more than double the price of the standard DualSense. So we're thinking it's getting all the bells and whistles along with it, and it kind of is. It has like the hair triggers, so you can change how much of a pull you have when you press R2 and L2, the back buttons, a lot of customization in the software, and the removable thumbsticks, as well as the higher quality build. So there's a lot going into it. However, the one thing that people started to notice, as well as press and media outlets, as they asked Sony, the battery life would be moderately less. So that sounded strange. Then we start to hear these numbers that don't really make sense. 4 hours? Well, we do have an early teardown now, which mine came in, by the way, and we will definitely be opening this thing up because take a look at this. This is posted up by Buds Controllers. It says, check out the battery size difference. They're just putting up the standard DualSense controller battery to the DualSense Edge battery. It's kind of hard to tell exactly because you could have a battery that might be a little wider, for example, and not as flat. But I mean, yeah, the size difference is pretty obvious. And then we get into the capacity coming in at 1050 milliamp hours compared to the DualSense controllers at 1560 milliamp hours. appears it's about 2/3 the capacity. Now, you do have estimations thrown around when it comes to the battery life of these controllers, but I did notice there are some battery tests that just started getting posted up on YouTube for the DualSense Edge, like one from Open Surprise, testing it in a real-world setting, just playing different games, getting roughly 6 hours of battery life out of the DualSense Edge. They noticed anywhere from 8 to 12 hours out of the regular DualSense. And this, I mean, it adds up. It makes sense based on the battery capacity. So it's not necessarily the DualSense Edge is draining battery power faster or anything. Sony, for some reason, put in just a smaller capacity battery. It's sort of working in the reverse from what Microsoft did with their Elite controller, where you get about 20 to 25 hours out of a pair of AA batteries, whereas the Elite controller they did, while it was sealed, the newer one, it got 30 to 40 hours, and then it would charge just fine through plugging in a USB cable and all of this. So I'm not really sure why Sony went this route. Typically, you have the premium controller and you expect it to just be heavier in general, which means you can just pack a larger battery in there and just say, hey, it also has, I mean, with the current DualSense controller, it has like 4 times the battery life, right? So unfortunate that Sony seems to be trending behind the rest of the industry when it comes to something like battery life, although I guess it's kind of been like that. Basically, since the PlayStation 3 with their controllers, they've always been on the lower end, and I'm not really sure why they've had such a hard time figuring it out. Next up, let's talk about Dead Space Remake. It's out today, and they're doing this weird global launch thing where it actually comes out at 11 a.m. Eastern time, so it didn't launch at midnight last night for the digital version. It would have been very strange to play a horror game in the dead of night. Good thing they saved it for early morning, but either way, it is out today. I'm excited to jump into this game. It's been a long time since I played the original Dead Space, but I do remember it having a serious impact when it released back in the day, and I played it on the Xbox 360. But let's take a look at the review scores for this one. Heading over to Metacritic, coming in at an 89. When it first hit on Metacritic, it was at a 90, so it went down 1 point, but it seems locked in at 89. That's on 56 critic reviews. Looking at the split, yeah, 55 positive and just 1 mixed. I mean, we're seeing a bunch of perfect scores out of this, with I think one of the lone mixed reviews being from Metro Game Central, and this is awesome. I'm really happy that this game came out in this way, to where it sounds like it's high quality. The visuals, audio, controls, everything is spot on. And I was watching some reviews for it, like from ACG, and I'm going through this, I'm like, you know what? I've seen enough. I just want to play this game. It's good to see that it is high quality, but it sounds weird to say I don't want to get spoiled. But as I'm seeing the scenes play out, I'm like, wow, that looks significantly better I mean, it's not necessarily a brand new game or anything, but they did remake it to where it feels like a new game. And of course, talking about things with the DualSense controller that's in play, some of the audio stuff, it sounds like a lot of attention to detail went into this remake from people at EA Motive who genuinely love the series. And while it's not as eye-opening of a remake as something like Resident Evil 2 Remake was, I mean, this is up there. So I'm really happy to see this finished product after what we kind of went through there with the Callisto Protocol being what we thought would be the evolution of Dead Space. Turned out things were kind of reversed. In fact, there were a lot of people who thought it would have gone the other way, to where Dead Space Remake would have been the lower scored one and Callisto would have been this 89 must play on Metacritic. But really excited. Check out Dead Space later today, and it already has New Game Plus. It's launching with that feature, something that Callisto Protocol took like a couple of months to have ready to go through a patch. But either way, check out Dead Space Remake later on today. It sounds like EA Motive really knocked it out of the park with this one. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about the Famitsu sales charts. This, of course, gives us a look at video game sales in Japan week to week. And this past week was the launch for Fire Emblem Engage, which we can see over here on the top 10, starting with Fire Emblem Engage, 144,558, something finally dethroning Pokemon Scarlet and Violet that's been at the top spot for weeks and weeks now. That, of course, now at $243,983. Splatoon 3, that coming in at number 3. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, of course. Nintendo Switch Sports, Minecraft, Mario Party Superstars, Momotaro Densetsu, Gran Turismo 7, and then Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Going back to Fire Emblem Engage at $144,558. People seem kind of disappointed in this number. It sounds weird because, wow, okay, 140 some odd thousand copies sold physically. It's not counting any digital sales, but I think just based on the pre-orders that we're tracking, many people were expecting over 200,000 copies for Fire Emblem Engage, and technically it's flat, just about, with 3 houses. It might have been up on that by about 1,000 copies. And think about how much larger the install size is now for the Switch rather than years ago when 3 houses released. So yeah, I guess if you compare it across the board, sure, it might have been a bit disappointing in terms of sales. But again, for Fire Emblem and how far that's come, hard to argue with 144,000 copies selling right out of the gate in Japan to get things started. Moving over to hardware, though, to Nintendo Switch at the top, 51,587. Then we have the PlayStation 5, 42,152, which, by the way, looks like Sony has indeed figured out a lot of their supply issues in Japan, as they have done now 2 weeks in a row, right? 44,000 last week, 42,000 this week. Then we have the PlayStation 4, 2,544 systems, the Xbox Series at 945, and then the 3DS at 83. The hardware is kind of interesting because the PS5 seems to be finding its footing there, right in the 40,000 or so consoles sold week on week. The Switch sure has fallen a bit there in the 51,000 or so range, but as we've seen, the Switch can just randomly explode to 100,000 systems sold in a week out of nowhere. And according to reports, Nintendo is looking to sell more Switch systems by upping production going into this next fiscal year. So I feel like they have some pretty good releases that are lining up to close out 2023, at least over the next 12 months, with obviously The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom coming up. But certainly something to keep an eye on there when it comes to the PS5 starting to find its supply footing, and then the Switch maybe starting to trend a bit downwards. We'll see what Nintendo has for us, though, coming up in the next month or two. And before we go to the comment of the day, we're going to take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday, where I ask, will Metroid Prime 4 be shown at the next general Nintendo Direct? 78% say no, 22% say yes. Wow, 78% say no. If you think about it, Metroid Prime 4 years ago was announced to the public that it is rebooted, but they probably handed it to Retro like months, maybe even a half a year before they made that announcement. It's possible that Metroid Prime 4 has been in development after this reboot for 4.5 years, and we still don't think it could be announced at the next Direct. Maybe we're just saying that not to jinx it, because I think that's a great way to close out the Direct, right? You show this Metroid Prime remaster that's apparently been just sitting on their shelf at Nintendo for the past, I don't know, however many months or years or whatever, according to rumors, and then you close it out, Metroid Prime 4, 2023, and they drop it this holiday. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day, as you're seeing here. This is from Ray saying, I'm actually okay with Skate being free to play because that makes me feel like they will consistently be updating the game. My only concern with it being free to play means that it's most likely going to need an internet connection just to play the game, so they can track all the free to play elements alongside it with all these currencies and stuff. So what happens if it comes out? We all like it. It's a good skateboarding game. It's fun. It's not bad with loot boxes. You can just kind of get along without them. But it doesn't become profitable enough for EA, and then they go and have to turn the servers off, and then boom, Skate's just gone. So with that potential future in mind, I would have much rather just been a standalone release with offline play and all this, and it being a $60, even $70 release. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below, but everything we talked about here today was the potential for a Nintendo Direct in February. Is it something you've expected this entire time? And what do you think about Advance Wars maybe getting shadow dropped there? And then also, what about the DualSense Edge controller from Sony? Why did you think they opted for a smaller battery? Thanks, guys, for watching. Have a great weekend. I'll see you back here Monday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time for Newswave.